Well, we'll go ahead and get started now, and it's great to have you all here. I am really glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to what our speaker has to say. And what am I supposed to do, Doug? Turn the mic. Like this? Okay. And we have, this is the Missouri, let me get the name, I always don't want to blow that, Missouri Association for Creation. And all of us here are interested in what the Lord has done with our marvelous creation, and we're always desirous to learn more of what he has done. And so, Marv, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can present our speaker.
All right. Well, good evening. I'm Marv Schaefer. Those of you who are watching online, welcome to you as well. A couple things before we get going, and I introduce our speaker. Number one, we just finished our well, we've been doing this since 2012, the fall of 2012, so I guess this is our 12th year of our zoo tours. And I don't see Scott in here. Where are you, Scott? He's out there. Well, we'll get Scott in here, and he'll give you a little report on how the zoo day went. And we have coming up in 2 weekends, the Gateway Creation Conference, and we're going to ask Mr. Zach Klein to tell us a little bit about the Gateway Conference.
Thank you, Marv, and I think if I back up here. Okay, so yes, the Gateway Creation Conference is going to be held next weekend, May 24, May 25, and some information, of course, is there up on the slide behind me. It's at South County Bible Church, and the conference will be live streamed, so you can attend it virtually as well as being there in person. And while it's not here on the slide, if you go on the website, there's more information. On Saturday, there will be a youth track for children ages 4 through 12, and that's going to feature gentlemen including Scott, who you'll hear from in a minute, who leads the zoo tour. And so there'll be live presentations and some hands-on activities for younger attendees about God's design and creation in various kinds of animals. So we're looking forward to that, and we have some fantastic speakers coming in, including Dr. Randy Guglielza from the Institute for Creation Research, and Dr. Joel Brown, who's with us attending, who is now the director at the Creation Research Society. So we have some fantastic content coming up next weekend at South County Bible Church, and you can learn more at the website at creationconf.com. And
there are flyers on the table.
There are flyers on the table with all the information I just gave you in a handy postcard format. So that's all.
Thank you, Zach. Scott, tell the folks about how it went at the zoo.
It was a zoo. It was a zoo down there. It was. It was. We had 150 or so families, whatever, over 500 people. Actually, over 2 days. So that was, and we had some of the best weather we've ever had on those 2 days. So we do a morning and an afternoon on Monday, and another morning and afternoon on Tuesday. And so had 7 of our speakers. Mr. Grimes was talking at the polar bears, and Marv and I were talking at the penguins, and just a very good turnout though that we had with that. So that was an exciting weekend. So the next time we have this is actually going to end up being in September. It's going to be September 30th and October 1st. So that's a Monday, another Monday, and a Tuesday. So you can be watching for that on our website as well. Okay.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, if you're not familiar with our zoo tours, very simply, we'll have 7 speakers at 7 different animals, and we tell the folks the awesome way God created each one to do what it does. And we've had a wonderful working relationship with the zoo. It was a little rocky in the beginning, but in recent years, it's been awesome. They've been great to us, and we need to tell them. In other words, you can't just show up. You have to register and be part of our group. But it's a wonderful experience. Our next meeting here next month, which will be the second Monday is, who's got their calendar open? June the 10th. I was going to say June the Cleaver. That tells you when I grew up. June the 10th. And Zach Klein will be speaking on a creation geology topic. He is refining what he wants to speak about. So as soon as we have that information, we'll get that to you. On our table out there, Gateway Creation Conference. We also have some books and things for sale, information about our group, brochures. Please come out if you have questions. Come out and talk to us. We'd be glad to answer them for you. We also, and I'm going to pass one of these out to everybody, we have tracts that we've produced and that we sell them, pack of 25 for $5, but I'm going to give everybody one. And if you like it, visit the table and grab some. Okay? So I'm going to introduce the speaker for tonight, who is Hannah Klein. And Hannah is an amateur astronomer and physics undergraduate at Liberty University. Thank you. She is co-organizer of the Clearly Seen Creation Conferences, which is an event series that aims to help people see the glory of God as revealed in the things that He has created. She is also a staff writer for the New Creation blog, and she has business cards out there for the New Creation blog, so you can grab one and keep up with her there. It's a website popularizing young earth creationist scientific research. The topic for tonight is, what did God create on day 2? The expanse and the waters above, and Hannah's going to tell us all about it. Hannah Klein. Please welcome Hannah.
All right, hello, and thank you all for coming out. So yes, I'm going to be talking tonight about what God created on the second day of Creation Week, what God made on day 2. And so when you think about the events of Creation Week, day 2 is probably not the first thing that comes to mind. You know, all the exciting stuff happens on the other days. So like, if you look at all the depictions of Creation Week, you see we have plants and we have animals, we have dinosaurs, we have stars. And day 2 there's a picture of sky and clouds. You know, there's not much happening on day 2. It's not very, nothing too exciting. But in actuality, it's what God created on the second day of Creation Week actually turns out to be very important for understanding astronomy and cosmology from a biblical perspective. So before I go into that, though, I wanted to define the word cosmology. Cosmology is the study of the universe, its structure, and how it operates. And usually the origin of the universe is also included under this term. So astronomy is studying like the stars and the planets, the things inside the universe. Cosmology studies the universe itself, where the stars are. So with that out of the way, let's look at the day 2 account. So Genesis 1, 6 through 8. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below from the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so, and God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. So there are some interesting questions that are raised by this quiet little account. So we start with the water from day 1. That's the water that's being separated, the water that the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the water. And then on day 2, God creates the expanse that divides this water into 2 domains. And the waters below the expanse become the Earth's oceans on day 3. So we know that the waters underneath the expanse, basically that becomes the planet Earth. But what happens to the waters above the expanse? And for that matter, what is the expanse itself? What is it that God made on day 2? So I wanted to overview a few of the major interpretations of the expanse of day 2, and which of course also relates to the waters above. However you define the expanse is going to impact how you define the waters above the expanse, naturally enough. And I've broken this down into some categories: the solid expanse, the atmospheric expanse, and the cosmic expanse. So to start with the solid expanse. And this is this is basically the question of is day two just the day two account just telling us what the ancient Near Eastern cosmology of the day was, which would be, as in this picture, a hard dome over the Earth. So the Earth's a flat disk, and then the firmament is a solid dome that sits over this disk, and the stars and the planets are affixed to that hard dome. And so there are some people that say that Genesis 1 is describing that type of cosmology, that's the way that the Israelites thought of the universe. And so this starts with, to explain where this idea comes from, the word expanse in day two, it's a translation of the Hebrew word rakia. And in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, this word is translated as stereoma, and it's referring to a solid vault of the sky, which is basically, it's the Greek translators were importing the Greek cosmology of their day into their translation. And so they translated that word rakia as referring to a solid dome, a vault, a firmament. Well, as a solid vault or dome. And then that comes into the Latin Vulgate as firmamentum, which is basically translating that Greek idea. That's where the firmness in the word firmamentum comes from, is the idea of a solid dome. That's not present in the word rakia. It's not in the Hebrew term. That idea of firmness in the expanse comes from the Greek translation. And of course, that firmamentum, you may recognize, that shows up in our King James English as the firmament. It's basically a transliteration of that word. So this idea of a solid expanse, a solid expanse explanation of the firmament, of the expanse, it comes from the Greek Old Testament translation. And so, based on those words that are used, it's been claimed that the Hebrew term itself is referring to a solid vault. And so people have put that translation history back into the word rakia, basically thinking that the word rakia has to do with a solid vault. It expresses a solid dome. And so, therefore, Genesis 1 is advocating a hard dome cosmology. And so the claim is that Israel's views on the cosmos were influenced by their ancient Near Eastern context. And so this graphic is from Logos Bible Software, actually, showing the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe. And the font's kind of tiny there. But they're basically saying that this is how the ancient Hebrews looked at the universe. The earth was flat, and then the expanse, the sky, is a solid dome sitting over that flat earth, and the stars and the sun and moon are affixed to that. And this chart is also saying that, like, the windows of heaven that the Bible speaks of are actually literal windows in the expanse, in this dome through which rain comes. So it's taking figures of speech in the Old Testament and translating it in a really woodenly literal way to advocate this idea that Genesis is supporting or is promoting a cosmology that's basically like what the ancient Near Eastern context would have been. So it turns out that the Hebrew word rakia, it derives from the root raka, and it has the idea of to expand or to stretch out. And this same verb is used when it's describing making the temple furnishings in Exodus. So when it talks about hammering out the gold plating for the ark and things like that, it's using that word raka. And so the idea there is it's not firmness, it's the idea of stretching, it's the idea of expanding something. That's what that root word raka, from which the Hebrew word rakia derives, that's what the meaning is there. And we can compare this with references in the Old Testament to God stretching out the heavens, which, like in Job 9:8, Isaiah 40:22, and there's other verses too where it talks about God stretching out the heavens. Now, the verb used in those verses, when it talks about stretching out the heavens, it's not the same word. It's not raka. It's not that verb. It's a different verb. But considering that it's talking about the same thing, it's talking about space, it makes sense to see the word rakia also as referring to emphasizing the expanded nature of space and not trying to emphasize a firmness to space. And then the other side of this, the other problem with this argument as well is that there's evidence in the Bible of sophisticated scientific knowledge, such as Job 26:7 talks about God hangs the earth on nothing. And then in Ecclesiastes, there's a description of the hydrologic cycle. So the point is, the Bible is divinely inspired. We can expect that when it talks about things related to science, that it's going to get it right, and that it's not going to be expressing something that's just the popular knowledge of the day that's outdated at this point. And then the other angle to this is that Israel was a culturally isolated nation. They were distinct in their beliefs about God and the universe. They were a distinct and special people. And so they weren't building their idea of cosmology and of the universe from the myths around them. They had, Genesis 1 is a very different account of creation than the creation myths of the other nations around them. So it doesn't make sense to assume that they were deriving their cosmology from those other nations. They were told by God to be distinct and separate from other nations in their context. Okay, next is the atmospheric expanse. And that's the idea that the expanse is Earth's atmosphere, and that the waters above are the clouds in the Earth's atmosphere. And so in that case, the expanse is just referring to something just related to the surface of the Earth. It doesn't have to do with space proper. And one variation on this idea is the vapor canopy model, which I'm going to go into briefly. So oops, sorry, I was not advancing the slides. So with the vapor canopy model, which was popularized by Henry Morris and John Whitcomb in their book, The Genesis Flood, in the 50s, right? And so in that model, the waters above are referring to a canopy of water vapor above the Earth's atmosphere that would have regulated Earth's temperature before Noah's flood, and that would have collapsed during the flood to provide a major source of water for the flood. And so in this view, the expanse is the atmosphere, and then the waters above are this vapor canopy that surrounded the Earth, and that only lasted up until Noah's flood. And this model it suffers from some scientific issues. Particularly, it would create a runaway greenhouse effect with Earth's temperatures. It would create temperatures on Earth's surface that were inhospitable to life because of the runaway greenhouse effect. So nowadays, it's not as popular in creation science circles. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong buttons to advance my slides. But then back to the idea of the expanse being Earth's atmosphere in general. Genesis 1:17 says that God put the sun, moon, and stars in the expanse, which would seem to rule out an atmospheric interpretation of the expanse. If the sun and moon and stars are literally in the expanse, then that couldn't be referring just to the Earth's atmosphere. So we could understand this as being phenomenological language, which is that's a fancy word to just say describing something the way it looks. So like when we talk about a sunrise or a sunset, we aren't saying the sun is moving, but we're just describing it as it looks to us, that the sun appears to rise and appears to set. And so we could understand this in that way, that the sun and moon and stars are in the expanse, phenomenologically speaking. I probably said that wrong. But just that they appear to be in the expanse, and so that's how we describe it. The thing is that the text says that the clouds are above the expanse in this view. If the clouds in the Earth's atmosphere are the waters above, then they're being described as being above the expanse, and the stars are being described as within the expanse. So if we're using that type of language, phenomenological language here, it doesn't make sense to say that the stars are within the expanse and the clouds are above when the stars don't appear to be below the clouds. That's never the case. So that doesn't really fit with that kind of perspective. And then another issue with that interpretation is from Psalm 148, where Psalm 148, the first 6 verses, they call for praise for things in the heaven, the sun, the moon, the stars, and that includes the waters above the heavens. And then verses 7 through 12 are calling for praise from the earth. And in this section is included the atmospheric phenomenon, clouds and wind, which seems to make a distinction between the Earth's atmosphere and the waters above the expanse, which would mean that the waters above the expanse aren't referring to atmospheric phenomena. It's something distinct from that. And then one other point here is on day 5, God commands the birds to fly above the earth across the face of the expanse of the heaven. So what does across the face of the expanse mean? And not all translations render it that way. Some of them say, the King James says, across the open firmament of heaven. It's translated different. It's kind of a tricky phrase to translate. in Genesis 1:2, that same Hebrew phrase is used to describe the darkness that spread over the surface of the deep. And then it's also used to describe when the Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the waters. So in that case, if we understand that phrase in that context, then we could see that here that the birds are flying on the surface of the expanse as viewed bottom up from the surface of the earth. So on the surface of the earth, if we're looking up at the expanse, we see the birds flying on the surface of that. And that that leads into the last interpretation I'm going to talk about, which is the cosmic expanse. Basically, the birds are on the further side, or the nearer side to us of interstellar space. So, the cosmic expanse defines the expanse as interstellar space, as basically as the universe. That's the expanse. Which would mean that space itself is a created thing and not the absence of something. And this is an important point because that's consistent with how the Bible speaks of the heavens as a created entity that God stretches out. It also happens to be consistent with modern science, that in modern physics, space is understood not to be just the absence of something, but a very real entity in and of itself. And in this view, the waters above the expanse exist at the edge of the universe. And not only do they exist there, but they exist there to this present day. Because in Psalm 148, which is after the flood, David speaks of the waters above the heavens. So whatever those waters are, they didn't collapse. They didn't collapse during the flood to provide water for the flood. They still exist today. And this water is perhaps in the form of liquid water, because the places that talk about waters above the heavens, it's using the word that's describing liquid water. And this understanding of the expanse is exciting because it has dramatic implications for creation cosmology, so for building a creationist understanding of how the universe works. And so I'm going to go into a few of those implications for cosmology. The first one is the idea that the universe is finite, which that's kind of, in conventional cosmology, that's not a given. So Isaac Newton proposed an infinite extent to the universe, because he realized with his theory of gravitation that if we have gravity that's going to be making everything contract, that seems to put a time limit on the existence of the universe. And in those days, the popular thinking was that the universe was eternal, which is an idea that goes back to the ancient Greeks. And so to maintain that idea of an eternal universe, Isaac Newton proposed that the universe was infinite in extent, and that way gravity could never contract the universe entirely. It gets rid of that expiration date for the universe, so to speak. So when Edwin Hubble discovered the expansion of the universe in the 1920s, that did away with the idea of an eternal universe, because if the universe is expanding, it must have started at some small finite point, and it couldn't be eternal in that context. But the idea of an infinite universe still stuck around, even though it was initially proposed to maintain an eternal universe. After the idea of the eternal universe was abandoned, people still held on to the idea of an infinite universe. But from the day to account, if the expanse is understood to be interstellar space, then the universe is bounded by the waters above, and therefore it's not infinite in extent. And then the next implication is that the universe has an edge, which, given the idea that the universe is finite, this might seem redundant, but it is possible to have an unbounded finite universe. You could think of the surface of a balloon. It's finite area, but it has no edge. And so if you think of the universe as being finite in extent, but of such a shape that it curves back on itself, then you could travel forever and never reach the end of the universe, even though it's a finite space. And that kind of a question is something that we can't really determine empirically by observation very easily. We can't really determine that at this point at all. But it's something that you have to determine that based on the assumptions that you're bringing in to start with. And so if we're starting with Scripture, if interstellar space is the expanse that's dividing the waters above and below, then it follows the universe itself is bounded because it's bounded by those waters. And then the last point is that the Earth is near the center of the universe. And and not necessarily at the exact center of the universe. The Bible doesn't make any statements about the Earth's particular location. But if the expanse is separating the waters above from the waters below, and if the waters below the expanse become the planet Earth, then unless that expansion was asymmetrical, then this implies the Earth is near the center of the universe. So when God makes the expanse, unless like more of the waters expanding on one side than the other or something like that, we're going to expect that the Earth is going to be near the center of the universe. Which that is significant because it does contradict conventional astronomy, the Copernican principle, the idea that the Earth has no special place, a unique place in the universe. So, with all of those implications for cosmology, I wanted to go into a particular application of all of this to creation cosmology. And this has to do with the cosmic microwave background. And I'm just curious, any of you already without me telling you know what that is, the cosmic microwave background? 2, 3, okay. So I have some explaining to do. All right, so the cosmic microwave background is uniform low cosmic temperature. So it's what it says it is. Microwave is referring to radiation at the very far end of the electromagnetic spectrum, so past ultraviolet light all the way down, where it's basically very low temperatures. And it's cosmic because it's something that's detected all across space. It's not related to any particular objects in space. It's like a background, hence the name, a background radiation that permeates all of space. And it was discovered in the 1960s by 2 astronomers who won a Nobel Prize for their discovery. Is that important? And it's hailed as the Big Bang's most successful prediction. So in the Big Bang theory, the cosmic microwave background radiation is supposed to be radiation left over from early stages in the Big Bang, before the creation of the stars and galaxies or anything like that. Or I should say evolution, not creation. Anyways. So the cosmic microwave background radiation is just, when we look out in space, there's this uniform background temperature, low temperature throughout space. It's very uniform, and it's not related to any particular objects in space. It's just like the temperature in space itself. So Dr. Danny Faulkner in 2016, he proposed that the waters above the expanse might be related to this cosmic microwave background. And that's interesting because the origin of this cosmic microwave background, this low temperature throughout space, it's a difficult question for creationists. It's in the Big Bang model, it has a good explanation. The Big Bang actually predicted something like this before it was discovered. They predicted this type of a very low-grade temperature throughout space as a relic of the Big Bang, of the early stages of the Big Bang. So, according to Dr. Faulkner, the waters above the expanse might be the answer to this problem, and that is because all matter has to radiate some sort of temperature. So if we have water at the edge of the universe, then it has to radiate some sort of temperature. And given the extreme distances involved and the fact if it's liquid water, it already is not a very high temperature, that temperature is going to reach us on Earth as a very low temperature, and it's going to be uniformly distributed throughout space since it's something that's bounding the universe. Especially if the Earth is near the center of the universe, it makes sense that this temperature is going to be uniformly distributed, and it's going to be a very low temperature. So perhaps the cosmic microwave background is radiation given off by the waters above the expanse. And so, okay, sorry. So that's a rather relatively recently published idea, and there's a lot more work to be done in that area. But all the same, it goes to show that the Day 2 account turns out to be very critical for building a creationist understanding of the universe. And yes, the creation events of Day 2 actually are exciting after all, at least for astronomers and physicists and people like that. So that's about all I had, and I see that I'm quite early. I'm just going to throw in this isn't on the script, this is just random, but there's this interesting parallel in Day 2 between Day 6, and that is when God there's doesn't end it's the one day of creation that does not end with a statement of, and God saw that it was good. He made the expanse, and he separates the waters above and below, and he calls the expanse heaven, and then there was evening and morning the second day, and it was done. And it's interesting because it reminds me of at the end of day 6 when God creates man, and he says it's not good that man is alone, right? It wasn't good until God had made Eve. And the expanse was not good until God had made the stars to fill it. God made the empty space with intention to fill it with light and beauty. So that was off script. That was random. That's all I have. All right, so this presentation is based on an article series that I wrote for the New Creation blog. And we also have, so the New Creation blog is a website that's, like Marv said, it's just popularizing creationist research. Its focus is a lot on model building, so like building understanding of how the universe works, not just saying, okay, this shows evolution is wrong because of this, but saying, well, if the Bible is true, what should we expect when we look at the natural world? So we have a website with weekly articles, we have a podcast, and then we also have a YouTube channel with weekly videos as well. And that's all I had. So if anyone has any questions.
Well, I'm old school, so I must confess that I was taught the Morrison Whitcomb view of the rakia, and so it's hard for me as an old guy to unlearn that. But what did you say was the most devastating argument against the atmospheric expanse? You say it was the rising of the temperature of the Earth would prohibit life. Was that the answer?
Yeah, so from a scientific angle, there was actually a lot of modeling done by like Larry Vardaman and others trying to make a way for that to work, but with that thick of a blanket of water vapor around the Earth's atmosphere, that's going to insulate the Earth's atmosphere so that temperature can't radiate out. And so it ends up with building up temperatures where it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. And one other thing, going back to the word rakia, I remember a long time ago back in seminary, we had to do a word study on the word rakia. You basically follow wherever that word is used in Scripture, you note it and you try to make some observations of it. And so I'm reaching back. I probably still have the notes in I should have brought them tonight, but from what I remember, because sometimes the word rakia is used to express the thin gold plating used in the temple.
Yeah.
And that would be called the rakia. And so I think a key idea of the word rakia is something that is not, as opposed to what the vault, the early views, the solid expanse, here's the rakia, and they would try to say that was referring to the vault of heaven, would be the rakia. But actually rakia is something that's very, very thin, very thin, and it's not something that's strong and like a vault is strong. It's something that's very, very thin. So that would help us to understand that the rakia here in this context is referring to something like the expanse, the atmosphere of heaven. It's not something that's a vault. It's something that's very thin and I'm running out of words here. Spread out, yeah. As they would pound out gold for the temple, it would be very, very thin and spread out over whatever they were putting that thin gold veneer over to be used in the temple. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that kind of also fits with the idea of the idea of stretching in general.
Okay,
like
you had said that too.
Stretched out, spread out, exactly. As opposed to emphasizing its firmness, it's emphasizing its expanded nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all.
Excuse me. So Hannah, the James Webb Space Telescope.
Yes.
Is there anything that it would be able to add to our knowledge on this particular topic? Is there anything that you could see that would help our understanding of this?
I don't know that the James Webb Telescope is being used for this type of research. I mean, I don't know a ton about it, so take this with a salt shaker. But The cosmic microwave background that I was talking about here, that's all microwave radiation, and the James Webb Space Telescope is dealing with infrared. So I don't know if it even is dealing with, I don't think they're using it for research on the cosmic microwave background or things like that. It's more for stars and galaxies specifically. Okay. Yeah, is my understanding. I could be wrong.
No, you're not.
So this goes along with that question. If we were to propose that there's water, a lot of water, I mean, we're talking enough to encircle the whole universe.
Yeah.
So what could be done from that's a scientific model. So let's remove that from the Bible for just a moment. Let's look at that from a purely scientific model. How could that be falsified? What data or experiment could we do to either falsify that or support it?
Send a man to the edge of the universe.
You could try that. I'm not sure that I know off the top of my head. The thing is, with questions of that nature, at least at this point, it is very theoretical. So there are certain ways, like, and Dr. Faulkner specifically proposed that perhaps we could find a signature of the water molecule itself in that radiation. And that would be a way of demonstrating that it was true. As far as falsifying the idea, I suppose if you can't find any evidence for it ever. But at this point, we don't necessarily have the technology to deduce that at this point. But yeah, so, as far as water at the edge of the universe being related to the cosmic microwave background, perhaps someday we could find the signature of water in that radiation, and that would be a clue that we're onto something there.
Well, so are there any great predictions that can come from this? Are there any predictions that we as creation astronomers, cosmologists, could make if there is a surrounding layer of water? What would we expect to see?
So like I said, the main thing I know of from Dr. Faulkner's paper, specifically he mentioned this, is the idea of a signature in the cosmic microwave background. So he's talking about just trying to describe or explain the cosmic microwave background in terms of that water. Beyond that, I'm not really sure. I couldn't tell you myself at this point. I mean, I'm not that versed in the subject as far as what things we would expect to see from that. There is one angle of this, though, one implication of this that we could find evidence for in astronomy would be, so Russ Humphreys has a similar idea with waters surrounding the universe. And in his model, some of that water surrounding the universe was what God used to create the stars and galaxies and planets. And so he's actually done work assuming if we start with the idea of the planets being formed from water and the stars being formed from water, then there are certain predictions we could make based on that. And so I'm sure you're familiar with his work on magnetic fields of the planets. Okay, so he actually did some work predicting the magnetic fields of, I think it was Uranus and Neptune, if I remember right, based on the idea that if God created those planets out of water, then based on that starting assumption, he predicted the magnetic strength of those planets, the magnetic strength of those planets, magnetic fields, before they were measured by the Voyager space probes. And when they were measured, they came very close to what he had predicted. So that's a case of, it's not quite the same as the idea of waters at the edge of the universe, but it's derived from that idea, and that was a successful prediction. So, but beyond that, I'm not sure myself at this point.
Yeah, that'd be a good thing, I think, to think about.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I can speak to the cosmic noise a little bit, coming from the airline basis here. Also, communications now are used over water, a thing called satellite communications, SATCOM. It's digital communications. It's modulated in the noise and extracted from the noise. So it's done a digital way. You're actually using a signal which is down in the cosmic noise through digital processing. So you're sending a digital signal in the cosmic noise, which is received in the cosmic noise, but is detected through digital processing. That's about the extent of it, but every radio has to deal with cosmic noise. You have to be above the cosmic noise, or it's noise, like you have static on your radio, or if you turn the volume up but there's no radio station turned on, you will hear shh, that kind of thing, crackling noises. So I think that's what I would assume to be cosmic noise. But there's this huge SATCOM, when they're using a very weak signal. In fact, GPS is one. GPS is a very weak signal. The satellites are 10,800 miles up in the air. The signal is actually in the cosmic noise, but with digital processing, like you have in your cell phone, your smartphone, it picks that signal up out of the cosmic noise. So I don't know what if that helps anything, but here it's something from the airline radio business.
Hello, thanks for your talk. Super cool. What I heard in one of those sections there was there's some ambiguity in what the word water might mean. I'm thinking of the Israelites are kind of thinking. I mean, we have different transliterations of words and whatnot. What is some sort of, how do I say this? Is there a different way that we can understand the substance of what that word for water was referring
in the Old Testament. So
Could they distinguish that from other liquids?
that's the thing. We have to use caution there because we don't want to read too much of obscure scientific knowledge into the Old Testament. So so I think generally speaking, most creationists would assume that it's talking just about water at that point. Because the waters when God separates the waters above and below, we know the waters below become the oceans. That's just normal water. So there's nothing in the text indicating to us that this substance that God separated on day 2 was something distinct from just normal water. Yeah.
Although that's not explicitly there either, right?
It's not. It's mostly by implication. The fact that the waters below become the oceans of the earth, and there's nothing said about changing those into something different.
Oh, I see.
It's
coming from the same substance.
Exactly. It's coming from the same substance. That's
Okay.
it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're talking about consistency.
Yes.
Great talk and very, very thought-provoking. And I'm being provoked here by the questions too. Good stuff. So, and sorry if I'm rambled just for a second here. But on Dr. Brown's point, I wonder we're doing a lot of study of exoplanets right now to see do they have water. It's a major thing there, and I wonder if they're developing methods for searching for the presence of water that could be applied to this question. Beyond Danny Faulkner's the molecular signature point. So that was one thought I had. Another thought was I just listened to a talk by Dr. Faulkner who said him and Russell Humphreys told him they were in violent agreement on their cosmologies right now. And it was not related specifically to this so much as it was related to the distant starlight problem and his new Dasha, I think is what he calls it, his Dasha approach, which is, I think, fascinating, and actually I like it a lot. So, but again, you're provoking all these thoughts, so great talk for that. I wonder what the Hebrew word for water is. Is there several? Because sometimes, like the Greek word for love, that can have a lot of influence over that word. Is there several words for water? Like when he struck the rock and water came out, if it's the same word, then I can see why Faulkner would say, well, it's the same word, that must be liquid, because you wouldn't strike the rock and get ice out. You wouldn't get steam. You're referring to liquid water, but I don't know the whole Hebrew word thing on water. So that was it. Just 3 random thoughts, but thanks for provoking them. Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, on the point about water, the Hebrew word in Genesis 1, it's mayim, and it's the general word for water. It's used throughout the Old Testament. So that's one point Dr. Faulkner brings up specifically about the subject, is he said the word that's being used there is the same word we use for water in the rest of the Old Testament. So it makes sense to see it as just being ordinary liquid water for that reason. Yeah.
How would you tie this into the expanding universe? I guess you could look at it multiple ways, but would you suggest that the firmament was formed and static, or it too is expanding?
Yes, well, if you understand the firmament as being interstellar space itself, then yes, it is expanding. And
I guess I mean the waters.
The waters, yes. I mean, presumably they'd have to be expanding with the firmament. And so Dr. Faulkner Dr. Danny Faulkner and Dr. Russ Humphreys have both talked about this subject, and like you mentioned, they're in violent agreement on certain issues. So Russ Humphreys suggests that water is in the form of ice, and so basically it would be relatively thinly distributed at this point. As the universe is expanding, it would be kind of dissipating. So it's not necessarily a permanent feature of the universe necessarily, but it's just something that's out there at the edge, if that makes sense. Yeah, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Let's go again.
Yeah, recently I've heard that water is H2O, 2 particles of hydrogen, 1 of oxygen. But if you put hydrogen and oxygen together, you can't make water. Is that true?
I can't really speak to that type of thing.
I just heard that recently. You can't actually, get some hydrogen and some oxygen and put them together. You won't get water. Is that true?
Going back to the first of the 3 approaches, 3 views. So we have the hard dome, the atmospheric, and then the cosmic view of the expanse. And you made a number of good points about why there's not really a good reason to assume that the Old Testament is inheriting an ancient Near Eastern cosmology. I think you're familiar with this as well. I'm just curious if you want to make any comments on it, but my understanding is that even the idea that the ancient Near East had a uniform hard dome cosmology is a bit overstated, that there's actually not a lot of hard evidence that all these ancient cultures agreed that there was a flat earth and a hard dome. You can find depictions of those in certain places, but we don't actually have the data to say this is what the people of Bible times all believed of the cosmology. They may have had many different beliefs. So I wanted to speak to that, because as I think most of us in the room probably key in on, that is kind of the liberal view, right? That the people, that the Bible does mean what it says, but it's wrong. It's simplistic, it's primitive. But that's reading in a level of confidence about what people back then actually believed, and we don't always have that confidence.
Yes, that's a good point, and I did neglect to mention that in this presentation. But yeah, that the idea that we know definitively what the ancient Near Eastern cosmology was in a holistic sense is, yeah, that is overstated. That is my understanding, is that it is overstated, and that, yeah, we know what certain cultures believed, but we can't say, like you said, we can't say that that is what the ancient Near Eastern cosmology was as a whole. Yes, thank you.
Yes, the discussion of language, the ancient Hebrew language, certainly the instrumental study of the solar system and the universe didn't come about until when? 1700s. So prior to that time, the overall study or even science of the creation was basically a word study. Would you agree with that? I mean, a word study. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. So without the technical instrumentation, to observe and study, and we've had actually a presenter of the flat Earth scriptural reference in this group, I believe, about a year or two ago. You remember that presentation? I think it was in our MAC group. It may have been in another group that maybe met in this the space that we use. But it was a scriptural study of the concept of the flat Earth, model or whatever. But certainly it's amazing, isn't it, that these men, women had such a passion and desire to understand the creation, that they observed, and that they were relentless, probably didn't eat much or sleep much, and that it was just amazing that it was done, in that culture of the day. Just praise the Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
One more question.
You were talking about the expanse. Does it have to be on the edge of the universe?
Does what have to be?
The expanse itself. Now, when the expanse went out, couldn't the expanse gone out way farther than the edge of the universe, and the universe hasn't gotten to that point yet? I'm just thinking that, because if not, the waters at the edge of the universe always have to be expanding. That would seem different than if it was all the way at a different point where it's already there, it's already finished, and the universe is going to it. Your thoughts?
Yes. So when God creates the expanse, it says that He called the expanse heaven, and then that's where He put the sun, moon, and stars. So that seems to imply that the expanse itself is space. It's where the stars are. In that sense, it would be the universe. As far as the waters above the universe expanding with the universe, if we see that as just that's where God put them at the end of day 2, God put the waters at the edge of the universe. That's just where they started. It doesn't say anything about what that looks like going forward, right? So, I mean, God put all the stars and galaxies in space too, but those galaxies and stars move around in clusters and whatnot. There's motions going on, so it's not like everything just stays put right where God made it. God put it on day 2 or on day 4. So I don't know that there's a problem with the waters above the expanse expanding and dissipating as the universe expands. It's just where they started initially. I mean, that raises questions, of course, of what the purpose of those waters are anyways, and things like that, of that nature. So, yeah, there's a lot to think about there. But, yeah.
Well, Hannah, you made my head hurt.
My apologies.
So let's all thank Hannah for her presentation. And she will be, we've got a table out there. There's information there. Hannah, be sure to pick up a card that has Hannah's blog on there and information about us. And we also have some items for sale. So thank you again, Hannah. And Ray, I was thinking about the question you asked. There's a law of nature called the law of the conservation of matter. And the law of the conservation of matter says the amount of matter in the universe, inanimate matter, is fixed. You can't create matter, you can't destroy matter. The amount is fixed. So when we talk about creating water, you asked about that. Can't really create water, right? The amount of water that was created on day 1 and then separated on day 2, that amount of water is constant. Now, it can change forms, liquid, gas, solid, but it's constant. And when you think about this. That means the water that was used to baptize Jesus is still here today. And the water, when the centurion put the spear in Jesus' side and it says blood and water came out, that water is still here today, somewhere. So I think that might be the answer to your question. Anybody got anything else before we close? Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Come to the table and get your, Gary, yes.
I just want to mention that I think about a week ago, I heard Dr. Randy, I believe it was on 100.7, 93.3, talking, I think he was being interviewed by Charlie Kirk, I believe.
Randy Galuza?
Yeah.
That's probably true.
About creation versus evolution.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've seen Dr. Randy, I love Dr. Randy's videos about the unique design of the human hand and arm, and also the creation of the baby,
Mm-hmm.
the relationship with the mother, wonderful videos. But I found it interesting that Charlie Kirk seemed a little bit overwhelmed, by this discussion of
Yeah.
evolution.
Well, Dr. Galuza, who's going to be at the conference the weekend after next, And you mentioned the part about the baby. I'll make this quick, and then there's refreshments and things out here too as well when we close. One thing I heard him say years ago that it just really hit me. He was talking about the whole process of childbirth. And the female has all of the eggs that she's ever going to have on the day she's born. And in the process, okay, so now the egg, here comes the egg, it doesn't implant. It's a foreign, as far as the female body is concerned, it's like a foreign object. It doesn't implant, right? And this cycle goes on and on and on. And then one of the eggs gets fertilized and it implants. And the way Dr. Galuza described that, he said, that's the baby telling the mom, this one's okay. Think about that. I mean, that really is, that's our Creator, man. So anyway, thank you for coming. Let me pray real quick, and hopefully we'll see you out in the lobby there. Lord God, thank you for this time together.